Now, one common joke about the Wehrmacht is that the logistics were bad, especially when it comes to Operation Barbarossa, and there's certainly a lot of truth to this. Yet it's usually explained with the lack of trucks, hubris and other aspects. Yet I think that this view might be a bit too simple and does not encompass the whole situation. So I think we need to take a look at the bigger picture, and by this I mean let's look at the globe and also expand the timeline. Let's start with the globe. For this we look at three major enemies of Germany in both world wars, namely the United States of America, the British Empire and the Russian Empire/Soviet Union. And if we look at the map, something becomes apparent rather fast: the vastness of those three enemies in relation to Germany. Yet space is only one part here, because we should not forget that Germany was in northwestern Europe and had a very good infrastructure, especially in terms of railways. Something that can't be said about the Russian Empire/Soviet Union. And although the British Empire had a similar infrastructure at home like Germany, this can't be said about the various colonies. Additionally, it had to maintain all these colonies as well and the troops there. The United States also had a great infrastructure at home, but once it engaged somewhere else, it usually had to cross at least one ocean. This meant that the logistics were of far greater importance for any of these three major powers than for Germany, for decades or even centuries depending on the time frame. The geographical position of Germany after its unification in 1871 onward created a quite different situation compared to those of the United States, Russian and British Empire. Since the foundation of the German Reich in 1871, the central location of Germany has been regarded as a threat in terms of the military spatial construction, because the empire was the only one of the five major European powers to border directly free of its potential competitors with Russia in the east, Austro-Hungary in the southeast and France in the west. Only with Great Britain there was no common border. In the event of war, however, the latter was able to cut Germany off from international trade by means of a naval blockade. Especially the comparison between the United States and the British Empire are quite interesting. These powers, unlike Germany or France, for that matter, did not need a large standing army. Germany nor France had the time to train and field an army after the war broke out, because the enemy was right at the border, not on the other side of the English Channel or even an ocean like the Atlantic or Pacific. Additionally, both the British and Americans faced similar problems in both world wars. As such, they could build up upon their experience from the First World War. Both Britain and America committed to operations on the European landmass. For each, this meant creating mass expeditionary armies and figuring out how to provide for those armies at the end of an overseas supply chain. Of course, the German position in the center of Europe with a strong infrastructure could also be turned into advantage, and already Frederick the Great used the strategy of interior lines successfully, and due to the dense railway network in Germany, this allowed for a faster mobilization and redeployment of forces. The geostrategic position of the German Reich, which separated its two allies Russia and France from each other, gave it, generally speaking, the advantage of being able to operate strategically on the interior line in a war on two fronts. This is to say, it theoretically opened up the possibility under certain conditions of still being the strongest as the overall weaker at the decisive point in each case, even if the opponents, separated by space and time, were able to be placed individually in time for the decisive battle, before they were able to support each other in a kind of diversion effect. This approach, of course, was also one of the reasons why the Germans were so focused on a short war, which also meant that they focused extensively on winning a decisive victory on the battlefield, something I explained in more depth in my video on why the Wehrmacht was so combat effective. Yet let's go back to logistics. So let's look at the historical perspective of the German logistics. For this, we take a short glimpse from 1884 to 1918. Now, during the German Revolution of 1848 to 1849, the Prussian army ran into some serious logistical problems. There was a lack of personnel, for instance, there were no officers for the bakeries and hospitals. There were other issues as well, and Krefeld summarizes the situation as follows. Under these circumstances, the trains were unable to reach the area of deployment in time, which led that Soldier Prince Wilhelm of Prussia, subsequently King and First German Emperor, to write that supply and transportation were the weakest point in the entire Prussian army organization. This led to a reform like the one in 1853. Nevertheless, there were more issues, like in the Austro-Prussian War of 1866 and the Franco-Prussian War of 1870-1871. Although both of them were resounding military victories for the Prussians/Germans, this was not due to logistics, but more despite the logistical situation. The chaotic situations on the railways in the rear, however, did not prevent the Prussian armies from continuing their inexorable advance into France. On 6 September 1870, the march on Paris got underway. By the end of the month, the ring around the city was in the process of being closed. Now, if you look at the First World War, there are some differences. First off, in this case, Germany lost the war, and the war was also far longer and more extensive. There were various logistical challenges, and not everything worked like a charm. But overall, for good or ill, the logisticians of the great powers met the challenges thrown at them with considerable success and laid the groundwork for the logistics changes of the ensuing century. Similarly, Gerhard notes that the main limitations of the German army in the First World War was mobility. The German army lacked the mobility to implement the theoretical plans in reality. For a fast mobile warfare conducted under time pressure in large spaces, the army which should decisively defeat an opponent under time pressure must be provided not only with well trained and equipped, but above all with highly mobile units. To summarize, the German historical experience with logistics from 1848 to 1918 reminds one of the Fester games. They have various flaws and issues, yet they were quite successful despite their flaws. This was in contrast to the Russian Empire, which already in the 19th century ran into severe problems with logistics. Russian interest in logistics started after the disastrous Crimean War in 1854, when it proved difficult to project military forces outside of the central imperial heartland, which likely in the long run had an influence that the Red Army adopted a far more modern logistical organization than the Germans in the Second World War, something that I discuss in more depth in this video about Soviet logistics. But back to the Germans and their focus on tactics and operations, which is summarized by Gross as follows. Traditionally, the operative thinking and logistics of the German army were designed for the border regions in Central Europe. The First World War had already revealed the limitations of this system. In the end, however, thanks to the pronounced ability to improvise, especially during the operations in the East, it was always possible to master any logistical problems that arose. The operators got used to the fact that the suppliers would somehow always conjure up a logistical solution. Now one might argue, well, the Wehrmacht was just ignorant and did not learn from the previous mistakes. Yet the problem is, we know that even after the victories, the Wehrmacht spent time and resources into learning from previous mistakes and other issues. For instance, after the successful campaign in Poland in 1939, Murray notes, "The devastating nature of Wehrmacht's success in Poland 1939 evoked an interesting response within the German military. The Army High Command found the performance of its unit, regular as well as reserve, most unsatisfactory." Of course, after the fall in France in 1940, the Germans became more complacent and assumed wrongly that the Soviet Union would collapse after a few weeks. But then again, this assumption was not limited to the Germans, as Kahn points out. According to a large array of sources, most British and American government officials regarded the USSR as more or less doomed when Germany and her allies attacked on the 22nd of June 1941. Soviet resistance was expected to last only a few months or even only a few weeks, according to some. These perceptions were not only harbored by low and middle level government officials, but apparently also officials at the very top. As such, German logistics for Operation Barbarossa were based on the wrong assumption of a very short campaign. Hence the supply system was severely lacking. Nevertheless, it was not completely ignored and allowed for an operational depth of 500 kilometers, which was 2 times the amount of that of the First World War. To summarize, considering the German geographical situation, it makes far more sense that the army focused on short wars and such also on tactics and operations. Similarly, since Germany had a limited experience in fighting wars far away from their borders and thus excellent infrastructure, logistics were often of limited concern, especially since the Prussians/Germans sometimes achieved major victories even despite lackluster logistics. But we are not finished yet, because I know someone will bring up the quote in the comment section, namely, amateurs talk about tactics but professionals study logistics. So let's reflect on this quote, because there are two important parts here. First, the general is from the United States, and second, he was a Marine Corps general. And the Marine Corps is first and foremost a branch of the armed forces that is concerned with offensive operations and attacking the enemy, usually by first crossing an ocean, unless the United States is at war with Mexico or Canada, which usually is not the case. Whereas most other countries don't fight wars thousands of miles away from their borders. Now for a Marine Corps general this quote makes a lot of sense, but for most other armed forces the situation is different, since their focus will likely be more on defending their own soil than to invading that of another country. Of course, logistics are essential even for such a force, since logistics limits the number of forces that can be deployed and kept combat effective. Yet for continental powers with a decent local infrastructure, there is far more leeway in logistics, whereas they usually can't trade territory for time, like Germany or France. So as always, context matters. Well, I hope you learned something new. Special thanks to Sönke for sending me Krefeld Supplying War and Christian for sending me Gross' book on German operational warfare through the ages. Both books were essential for creating this video. As always, source link in the description. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for watching and see you next time.